Hi there. Thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to have a go at doing a small still life. In my art classes, I'm covering still life this term, and we've been looking at painting a day, particularly Carol Marine's book. Carol Marine's excellent book on daily painting. Well worth a look. Got some great sort of tips there, and I'm sort of using it to help explain a bit about painting a day to my students. So I think I'll just crack on. So as you can see, I'm using this ampersand gesso boards. This was actually a recommendation in the book, and I haven't used these before. So I did a painting yesterday and I quite liked it. Some of my students found the surface to be a bit too smooth for them. And I can see what they mean. Normally the gesso we use tends to be a bit grittier, and so it just holds the paint a bit more. So these are a bit smooth, but I think they give a nice effect. And it saves a lot of time, and it's a bit of hassle getting all the boards cut. And so there we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I've got my palette here. I'm going to squeeze out my paints. So I've got it arranged here so you can actually see what I'm doing. And I can just go through the colours. Now, sometimes I use a limited palette, but this is my little pochade box. So I'm going to put out all my colours, even though it might seem a bit excessive. So we'll start off with bismuth yellow. Nice bright yellow. And then we've got cadmium yellow. So this set of these particular pigments I got earlier last year now. Largely inspired by watching some great videos by a painter called Tom Hughes, and he is a plein air artist. He does work in studios, but he does a lot of his stuff outdoors, and he's got a great video on his equipment that he uses for outdoor painting. So I made a note, and it also meant buying more sort of professional quality paints. So before I used Winton brand, which are like Winsor & Newton student paints, but I thought I would try to sort of get into the better quality pigments. So what else? We've got a crimson. So I'm putting this out largely according to the colour wheel. As you can see, we're going from cool yellow, warm red, cool red. So our cool blue, in this case French ultramarine. And what I say to my students is it doesn't really matter how you put your palette out, but it's best to be consistent with it. I like the analogy of keys on a keyboard. If every time you sat down at the piano they were all in a different order, it would be harder to become sort of spontaneous with it. So if you put them out the same way, eventually your sort of hand learns where to go for the colours, and it makes colour mixing a lot more intuitive and straightforward. So that's a cool blue. Then we've got a cobalt blue. And I think what I'm going to do is just put out some umber here. So I have got some other colours, but I think that will be fine for what we want to do today. So the great thing about this little box is I can put the colours out now, and when I pack it all away I can take it to my class and then I'll be ready to go as well. So I just sort of keep the colours here and keep this area relatively clean. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is just tone the canvas. So as you can see, the picture I'm doing, we've got an orange, a lemon and an apple sitting on a silver plate. So because the painting is quite warm, apart from the silver plate, I'll start with a yellowish ground, and that just makes life a lot easier. It's easy to paint the greys on top of the yellow than vice versa, because yellow is a relatively sort of weaker colour. So just using a bit of medium. This is actually thinner, so this is like my white spirit. I was using Zest It, but I've run out for the moment. So toning the canvas has lots of functions. One of them is it makes life a lot easier. You've killed off the white, so it's almost a more inviting surface to work into. Also, if you leave it white, what happens is if you leave little bits, then white tends to pull the eye. So by killing off the white, you're not going to have that problem. So I'm just drying it there, just taking off the excess, just so it's dry to the touch. This way it's not going to interfere too much with what goes on over the top. It might do a little bit, but as I say, I've taken the excess off. So I'm using a smallish rosemary brush there with a filbert head. I think next time I buy some of these rosemary brushes, I think I'll go back to flats. The filbert has a little sort of rounded tip, which I think is quite good for sort of outdoor painting. But for still life, I think generally I prefer the flat. So now we're just going to use a dark colour. Again, this doesn't have to be any particular colour. It's whatever you fancy, really. So I'm just making a bit of a red. And I'm just drying this, so we're looking almost, I prefer this to be almost like dry brush, so I don't want it to be too definite a line. Okay, so, and then I can start to block it in. So keeping everything very simple at the beginning, and this is where I like to use these diagonals. They tend to, when you're working with these sort of spheres, the diagonals tend to give things a bit more, make them look a bit more solid. So that's not ideal. So really I want this, I want the lemon to almost be a bit bigger. So what I'm going to do, give that a quick wipe. So I'm left with a bit of a ghost there, so I'm going to redraw it. Just keeping this one a bit smaller. One of the reasons is to create depth. So I want big to small, even though they're not, you know, they're about the same sort of size, but big to small is going to help just create the feeling of front and back. And with this part, I'm looking also at the negative spaces, so these gaps between. Just starting to think about how this plate sits. So big, small, again that's helping just to create depth. So the great thing about oils and this way of working is everything remains fluid. So we can wipe out, we can change. This is why it's a great medium for beginners. So often I have people come to the class that have done watercolours before, and of course with watercolours it's a bit more, once it's done, it's done. And so, I mean, there is room for manoeuvre, but perhaps not quite as much with oils as with oils, when you can easily take away and add. So we've got a bit more space there. So again, looking at these sorts of spaces helps with the drawing. So last term in my class we did we looked at drawing more specifically, and one of the things I was hoping was that this will help my students when we come to do the still life paint and landscapes. The drawing is really what's fundamental. So with these small still lives, it's this stage. This is probably the more difficult of the stages. Once we've got this established, if we can get the drawing fairly accurate, then the rest's going to come a lot easier. So I'm looking at these spaces here now. Just trying to make sure I've got these roughly proportioned. And then I can also just say a little bit about the shadows. So as I say, this is almost dry brush here, so I'm just rubbing this in to create some tonal values. So that comes in like that. A bit of shadow on the side of the lemon. This is where squinting the eyes is good as well. That all becomes... So this is just sort of suggesting the form. So as you can see, already we're getting the sense of the light on the fruit here. So this is where my interest is, so I want these to be nicely illuminated, and so it's important to get these areas nice and dark. So we're just getting a feel for that. So now what I'm going to do is to start to block in. So we're going to start, I think I'm going to leave the fruit and do the plate. So I say you don't use white at the beginning of a painting. but only towards the, like this stage it's alright, you can sort of block in with it, but initially you want to paint transparently, just with medium, with terps. Okay, so again, squinting the eyes. So I've just got myself a bit of medium there. Just a combination of terps and linseed oil, so it means the paint will flow a bit more. So when I'm doing this stage, the thing I'm trying to do is basically is to block in. So that means you're trying to get the general tone. So I'm perceiving this up here as generally quite dark, and I may have slightly overstated it, but I need this to be dark to show up my apple. Okay, and although we get these little, there are some highlights here, so we can just find the edge of the plate here. I'm using warm and cool there, umber and blue. So this blocking in phase should be done sort of quite quickly. If you've drawn out the objects well, then you're still looking, but this is more like filling it in. This is filling in what you've, in a very simple way. Okay. So this is a bit of a cooler grey here. So we're just lightening it up slightly. So that's basically going to act almost like an underpainting for the, if I do put some marks on to suggest the plate, this is what it will, this is darker colour is what it will sit on top of. So then we can put a bit more, whilst we've got this on the brush, just find areas. and then it gets quite, the shadows in some of this plate get quite warm and change colour, which is the nice thing about painting something like this metal plate, because you get these reflective surfaces. In fact, here we get this yellow creeping in from the lemon. We'll do a bit more work. And here, again, this area remains quite warm because of the influence of the orange. And although there are variations, I'll put them on afterwards. So at the moment, it's just about getting the general sense of it. So there's a nice little highlight there, but that will go in towards the end, and it will work better on a slightly darker ground like that. So you say there's a nice, you can see there's a nice interplay here between warm and cool, warm greys and cool greys. Overall though, what I painted there is quite dark, and that's designed to help let these bits of fruit pop out when I put them in. Okay, so that's that stage. So now we'll block in the fruit as well, trying not to get, again, bogged down in detail. So just looking for the general colour of each area. So I'm using this bismuth yellow and just picking up other colours. There's colour on my brush, so I'm not going for particularly pure colour. Slightly almost greyish colour there. Just enough. Still relatively a light colour, but it's dark enough now that I'm going to be able to put my highlight on. So the highlight is, that's what people like, and it's nice to put that on at the end. So the highlight's going to go, if we put that on, say about there. And we might get another one. This is where it's just gonna go into that shadow, and there's a nice little bit of red there. So I'll just put a bit of that on. Even though that will probably be corrected, I'll just get some of that on from the beginning. Okay, there's that. So I'm just refining that contour just so it blurs, softens into the dark, it's not too stark. And then we can just pop the shadow in. So shadow is a bit of a warmer colour. So again, going a bit more intense with the yellow here, and that's because, well, it is a bit more intense, but also it's a foreground object, so pushing the colour a bit, the saturation is going to make that stand out a bit further. Like that. Now a shadow colour, again quite a warm shadow, perhaps a bit of umber and blue. Okay. Just soften that contour. There's that lemon. And now we can stick the orange in. So the orange is a little bit of a funny shape, so that's how nature is. Obviously you get different shaped bits of fruit, but sometimes it might look right in real life, but in your painting it might just look like you've drawn it badly, so there is a bit of a balance there, but I'm going to try and draw it roughly as I see it here. So just leaving that highlight area. Like that. Cutting into the shadow slightly. Okay, and then this really does get a bit redder in the shadows, so we use a bit of that crimson. And you see the contour at the top there is very much dark against light, which is nice because you then get a dark contour and a light contour, and it makes the forms more interesting that way. So that's almost the blocking done. So as I've got the orange on, what I'll do is I'll just pull a bit of that into my silver plate about here. Maybe even pushing the red slightly. And it just gives the feeling of the light bouncing around in there somewhat. And as it happens, we've also got some of this, the yellow. Just bouncing off that lemon. Okay, so just before we finish the blocking, we can just get these are usually the icing on the cake, but I'll get them in because they're the highest, they're the lightest lights. So it's good to get them in so we can see how everything is comparing. So there's a bit of a highlight there. Maybe just pushing it there. So making this grey a bit cooler as it comes this way, like that. Again, just softening, you know, this is the distance, we don't want this to pop out too much, but it does create a nice sort of compositional device just to make sure the attention flows around the picture. So with this light sort of, this is the sort of colour we can see on this plate in a few areas, so while I've got some on the brush, I'll just put some more. So there's a pattern on this plate, but I'm not going to paint that in any detail, just suggest it. And we've got some of that in here as well. Okay, so now I've got it to this stage, it's just really a job of refining it. So I'm going to go through it bit by bit and just try and push it, some of these areas a bit further. But this is the general, so this is how to start a painting basically, is you start with this general blocking, get the drawing, get the blocking, now you can refine it. And again, this is, I mean, some people might even prefer the painting like this at this stage. So this is more about personal taste. Looking at Carol Marine's book, she tends towards this more blocky, I say unfinished. I mean, what you can see is that the work has been, it's all the right colours in the right places. It's just she hasn't refined it, and again, that's more of a personal, it's, people like to see this sort of blocky stage, but I'm tempted to just refine it a bit further. But I'm not trying to create a photographic finish here, I'm not going to just work into it to death, so this is just about striking a balance. Now I can't remember, it's probably someone online, but someone said you should keep working on it, and as long as you're having fun. So as long as you're enjoying it and you feel that you're to some extent improving it, then that's, you know, a good sign. But at the same time, you need to know when to stop, because what happens is you will quickly lose the sort of freshness and things will start to look overworked. And where you go from here tends to be a bit intuitive. The main thing is just to keep stepping back or taking your head back so you can just see what's going on. And then areas will call to you. So this bit's, it's got some darker shapes in. Okay. That's more reflected light there, just bouncing up off the plate, but it gives it a bit of interest, which then comes round a bit more of an intense yellow there. And then try and get this red to pop a bit more. So a good bit of red really can bring a painting to life, and this is a good cadmium red, so it's a very intense colour, but I'm just reluctant, I don't want to go perhaps to the full intensity. Just something like that. Okay, then we can get the highlight on. Not going to pure white, just perhaps keeping it a bit yellow. Some of that red into the metal there, and then around here just making the shadow a bit more intense. So if you're enjoying the video, here we go, little plug. I'm hoping to do more of these. Now I've got the setup, so I've got myself a camera, and as you see I have started doing YouTube videos, so if you like this one and you'd like to follow me, then hit subscribe, ring the bell, and then you'll be notified about any upcoming videos. So, I mean, I really enjoy painting, so I'd be doing this anyway. In fact, I've got a class in a couple of hours. I'll be doing something very similar, but it's nice to work at home, and to actually talking about the process helps. I find, when I'm teaching, the opportunity to go through the process and explain it helps me in my own practice. So I'm just starting to put in some of these little variations around here. Okay, and let's just push this shadow a bit more. And then we've got that nice orange that's bouncing off the orange into this apple. So a little bit like that. Easy to overdo it, but it is quite a strong reflected light there. However, this is actually brighter or lighter. So I'm going to use this pure, this is cadmium yellow, warm. It's almost orange basically. Again, giving that a nice hard edge makes that pop. So hard edges, soft edges, just trying to keep variety. And then we can put the highlight on here, slightly pinkish light. And going a bit paler in the middle. Like that. And then the lemon. The lemon's not too bad actually. If the blocking's good enough, then you don't need to do tons of work to these. That highlight. Quite a strong bit of reflected light there, just bouncing back in. Again, that's helping to bring that forward. There's the three main objects refined. Squint the eyes out, and so we get a bit of the orange reflected in the lemon. Like that. And then some little colour accents. The shadow of the orange gets really quite red before it disappears into shadow. So, help in that. Okay, spherical, bit of modelling. I think when you're practicing painting, this is why these daily painting projects are so good, because it means you can practice these fundamental painting, spheres, highlights, shadows. These are going to come up again and again almost regardless of the subject that you paint. So practicing how one tone goes into another, how it changes colour. These are the things that are worth practicing. And the blocking, the initial stages. That's why you're much better to do loads of these sorts of paintings than spend, you know, months, well, weeks on a much bigger canvas. Because you can work through the problem quicker. And you are going to paint some good ones and bad ones. But that's another very liberating thing about painting a day, is you don't have to worry. You will, that, you know, if you paint say 20 paintings, you'll learn that sometimes you win some, you lose some, but overall you'll see that you're making progress. So that disappears. A little bit of red there. And then I'm just going to use another brush and just soften a few of these areas. Again, squinting just to get the overall feel. So I'm just pushing some of this back. You don't need this highlight here. The way it works here is we get this lighter grey. So this is a light area here, so actually lightening up the metal underneath, it helps reinforce this as an area of light. Just suggesting some of these little marks on the silver. Go, and that's so I'm going to do quite a bit more fiddling, but that is largely it. bit more subtle. And just push the darks now, so umber and blue. Just going to push some of these just to make some of those highlights pop out a bit more. Alexa, stop. So just little touches here. Okay, there we go. So that is that. As I say, the idea with this is to do one a day. Of course, that's quite a, not everyone's going to be able to do that. I'm certainly going to try, well, I'll be doing them in my class, so I'll have a good reason to try and keep up. And then if you like to do this at home, or you'd like to give it a go, I definitely recommend Carol Marine's book. Also, there's a very good website, Daily Paintworks, which exhibits pieces from people doing this sort of practice from all over the world, which is well worth having a look at. And yeah, whether you want to show anyone or not, I think it's a really great way to improve your painting. So if you like this video, say like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.